Hey everybody, you got Mark and Wayne and Mark B. And I'm going to actually give something about Mark B before we go here. Mark B is a recording star today, or not recording, I keep saying that. He is a radio star. Mark B was on the radio today in Dhaka, which is in Bangladesh where he lives. Mark is a drummer in a band. And Mark, why don't you say something? You're always so quiet. Jump in. Tell us what you did. Mark, you did an interview and a performance, correct?
Right, yes. We were supposed to do a 2-hour show, but it ended up being 3 hours. And we chatted and basically had fun and played some songs. Came back. It was fun.
How many songs did you play, Mark? How many songs did you guys play?
I think we did 12 songs.
Wow. Mark, do you know Mark Shepard? Do you know of any radio show that would do 12 songs of anybody in the U.S.? I mean, that would be like crazy.
Maybe a local community, radio station, but that's about it.
Yeah. By the way, real quick, and then we're going to do something a little different tonight. We're actually going to play a bunch of videos. Mark is traveling. He is in the Washington, D.C. area. He was on the road all day, did not have time to get something very specifically ready. So we've got a bunch of kind of best of videos of Mark. We're going to play them, and then he's going to comment on them and talk about them, and you guys can ask questions. You're already asking.
I don't know.
But
I don't know about this best of stuff, though.
Well, whatever. They're videos that were chosen, and they're actually from my place when Mark was here a little over a year ago, or a year and a half now, and they're relevant to everything he's been talking about. And actually, our videographer Brian picked them out. So, but Lisa asked, absolutely. And by the way, the website for this event, the workshop, was literally just created yesterday, late yesterday. And it'll be open to the public. Yes, absolutely, and that's what Ben Hart, whose place is it at, he's actually beginning to advertise and market it right now.
And Wayne, can I interrupt for a second? And Miranda had a question. Who was the person on the webinars here who's been indexing this particular webinar series?
Alyssa.
So if
Alyssa,
Miranda contacts Alyssa, which assignment had the homework assignment that we're talking about?
30, number 30.
Okay.
I believe.
So,
I think, Alyssa, correct me. Everybody else correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was either 29 or 30. I think it was 30. Oh, no, 27. You know what? Alyssa's right. It was. I had 30 in my brain. 27. Episode 27, everybody.
Okay. So that's an answer for Miranda's question. Miranda? Or whoever asked that question. Sorry, go ahead, Wayne, continue.
Well, no, I'm going to start playing this video. You guys see my screen. It'll take me a second to make it a large screen, and then we'll go ahead and start it. And then Mark's going to comment, and you guys can ask questions afterwards. Here we go.
Mostly a ecological, biological kind of guy. I'm a life forms things. Give me the plants and the animals. It's like the potter's clay that I like to work with. Right here, I'm sitting on a beautiful example of, I think, of what we need to do in all aspects of living on planet Earth sanely. We need to understand, observe, what is the resource around us. Here I am in a sandstone quarry in northern Colorado. An incredible resource, stone that's formed in layers that you can chip with hammers and piece together into a bench like this. If you want to talk about sustainable, there's no fasteners holding this together, just gravity and the way the stone was chipped with a hammer. This is brilliant technology. This is using a resource at hand. 10 million year life cycle on this. What a great little bench. I only wish I had a little shade, so maybe we should plant some trees. Yeah.
All right. Mark, comments, and then any questions?
Part of what I wanted to comment about that is, and I've done a lot of like the public YouTube stuff that you'll see about me. I get down on permaculturists a little bit. I'm a permaculturist, licensed permaculturist. Bill Mollison signed my diploma for permaculture design. Okay, so I'm in that group. That's where I'm coming from. However, like this one client that I worked with, they went to a workshop of permaculture design where they're going to get their permaculture design course certificate. They spent 2 full days learning how to make a cob oven. So they go back to Vermont, where they're from, 70 inches of rain a year where they live, and they're going to make a cob oven. So they get all these stones out of their field, because their field is about 50% stone, and they make a little pedestal and they build a cob oven on it. Well, there's no clay anywhere near there, so they had to go to the local university in the eastern part of the state, about halfway down. Don't tell anybody. And they bought bags, 50-pound bags of clay from the art college, because there wasn't any clay on their property. And then they mix it with water, they mix it with straw, they make a cob oven, they fire it and all that kind of stuff. Well, you know, it doesn't matter how much you fire clay. When it rains 72 inches a year, it's going to dissolve your mud oven, so the mud oven just turned into a pile of glop. I'm not dissing the idea of a cob oven. What I am dissing is the idea of applying an answer where there was never a question. They didn't have any clay. They had no resource. So it makes 0 sense to go down the road and buy a couple of bags of powdered clay to make a mud oven in a place where it rains 70 inches a year, when you had to get stones out of your field and make a stone pedestal to put the clay oven. And you look around the country, you'll see cob ovens underneath sheet metal roofs all over the place, because they're going to dissolve in the rain. So what I like about that stone bench is there is a resource. If you've got stone, all you got to do is cut it appropriately, and you fit it all together, and that thing will last virtually forever. Was it last week that I showed the slides from Italy, or 2 weeks ago? There's these stone houses with stone walls, no mortar, no concrete whatsoever, stone roofs with no mortar, no pegs, no anything. It's just stones stacked, and it's not like a pile of rocks. These are beautiful homes that have been standing for 1,200 years, 0 maintenance. That is appropriate technology. That is permanent, as far as I'm concerned. Why is it that the permaculture movement doesn't talk about building sustainably with local products like stone? Why isn't that really like the thing? Because stone lasts a long time. Well, why don't they talk about building with logs? That's a very appropriate technology, and it's just not talked about. You got to make a straw bale house, you got to make a cob house, whatever. So I think that's beautiful. I mean, a stone bench, that bench will be there forever, especially in an arid environment. There's hardly any water going to come down. You will have freeze thaw and hot cold, but that bench could last a long time.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, that quarry, that property, that's my property, and that quarry is literally, there's no heavy equipment that's used to mine that stone. It's all done by hand. It is reclaimed every year after it's done. There is heavy equipment that's used to move pallets and move very heavy amounts to get it from one place to another. But other than that, we don't ever take down a tree. All the trees there stay up, so you'll literally see them working around where the trees are at. I don't know if you realize, Mark will talk about this, but where we get trees that will propagate is when there's disturbance. That's the natural way. And so we actually have more trees. And, there's been disturbance. So anyway, and it's just a resource that we have, and we're making use of that resource. And we make fences out of that stone. We make buildings out of that stone. We do all kinds of things with that stone.
So actually, that's worth having a conversation about right now. Where I'm at, Washington, D.C., I'm across the Potomac from George Washington's estate. Is it Mount Vernon, I guess it is? And there's a view shed protection area. It's got to be, pristine and beautiful and natural and all that kind of stuff. You can't build buildings certain height. Openings in the woods can't be more than a certain size. Well, the property where I am, it's a nonprofit organization that the people who originally bought all the property deeded a whole bunch of it to the federal government, and it became a National Park Service unit because it was protecting the viewshed of Mount Vernon. Well, in the center of it is where the buildings were. That was this family's, you know, their country estate or whatever. And so now there's a nonprofit organization working it, and the rules regulating what they have to do, how they have to do it, is so totally out of sync with ecological reality. It's crazy how you can't cut a tree. You can't cut a tree here without filing papers. It takes about a year to go through all the paperwork to get approval to cut a tree if it's larger than 6 inches in diameter. Even if you planted the tree, you have to file the paperwork in order to get permission to cut it down. And then the thing is, in order to plant the tree, you have to get permission to plant the tree. A year permit process to plant a tree. It's insane. So disturbance, they're totally out of sync with the fact that this place is in a certain time phase ecologically. And as ecologists on staff, and we're sitting around the table having a conversation right now, and they're all backing me going like, yeah, it's exactly where we are right now in successional time. So either we disturb the site to keep it in this phase, we severely disturb the site to put it into this phase, or we don't disturb the site, which is its own kind of disturbance, and it will turn into this. So let's go do something that goes along with that successional pathway. Then it's less work for us because we know that successionally, naturally, ecologically, that's what's going to happen next. And so you try to like make some sense of it. This is the craziest place I've ever been with overlapping jurisdictions and regulations. And it's totally clueless. You know, the people who are making the big decisions are clueless as to how nature actually works. So don't let that be you.
And I'm going back and answering a question that you can see I'm moving the questions over so you guys can see it. Lisa, I don't know. I don't remember the website name off the top of my head. It's something like the name of the farm is Back the Lane, New York. It's a Restoration Ag back. Anyway, I'll get it for you. I'll put it on the website so you have it, and we're going to talk about it more as time goes on. All right, next video is going to be about, as you can see, honey locust trees, and it's 5 minutes. Take a little longer.
So we're hanging out in a small grove here of honey locust trees. Looks to me like there's 1, 2 rows, 3 rows of them planted. Current landowner tells me that these were planted about 10 years ago. Although honey locusts are a legume in the Leguminosae family, they don't have the nitrogen-fixing nodules on their root. Their foliage does contribute a lot of nitrogen when it decomposes. But one of the most distinguishing characteristics of these big, gigantic pods, the pods, they're kind of flat, and inside they have a really hard brown bean, and the bean is surrounded with sugar. And I've read places where the sugar, the percentage is like 18% sugar, which is an incredibly high percentage of sugar. And what's amazing about them is the beans are rock hard, and they're designed to go through the digestive ruminant and then be excreted out the back in a nice pile of manure. And so once upon a time, honey locusts were browsed by Pleistocene megafauna, which included camelids, ground sloths, 2 different species of giraffe. And that's a perfect way for a tree to spread itself, is to be so hard, the seed is so hard it's almost indigestible. It has a coat on a seed coat. You soak the seed in water, it expands tremendously. It's a really slimy, gelatinous seed coat on it. I've actually dried those pods and ground them up in a flour mill and added it with pancake batter to make pancakes. It's an incredibly drought-resistant tree. I don't know if it would survive on only 10 inches of rain a year, but definitely it's working here down in the lower area with a little bit more soil, so probably with some water management structures we can get them to survive. So we have here a handful of the honey locust pods. You can see inside where the beans are located. These are not mature, they're not ripe yet. I've torn this one open so we can get inside and see a little bean. Right now it's pretty soft. You could use this as a like lima bean in cooking if you want. And this greener material here, this is where the sugars are accumulating. Peel the 2 layers off, and this will all be crystalline sugar. When this pod gets brown and dry, this will be hard as a rock, and all this green stuff will have turned to a nice brown crystalline sugar. What's interesting about it is if you look on a lot of ingredient labels, product labels, you'll see what's called locust bean gum. Well, locust is used as an industrial product worldwide. There's machines used for the cultivation of it as a huge, large-scale agricultural crop. And yet somehow in the U.S. it's skipped our attention and faded from our general agricultural usage. So we could have new varieties of honey locust. Look at all the green in there. That's what's going to turn into sugar. It's in the process right now, accumulating all the sugars. That bright green. We could be making sugars from this. Obviously, we've got the bean. It's an incredible animal feed. Cattle like it. Sheep like it. I imagine alpacas would like it because they're so similar to sheep. Actually, in one book that I've read, J. Russell Smith's Tree Crops, it's dated material, but they were looking at varieties, because way back in the 20s and 30s, agricultural research stations actually were researching tree crops as a viable agricultural setting. And then they said if with one variety of honey locust grown in your pasture, Millidor, if you had 50 trees per acre, that's the equivalent of 50 bushels of corn per acre that's being grown in addition to all the pasture that you already get. So it's an excellent silvopasture tree. The one drawback that I've noticed with honey locust is most of them have really long thorns. These ones don't, so it makes me suspect, that these are, there are selections that are thornless honey locust. They've been developed, bred for the landscape trade, and that's where he might have got these, are thornless honey locusts. And there's also breeding being done for the landscape trade, thornless and podless, and if you look at these, we had 3 pods on maybe 50 trees. I have a feeling that's where these came from the landscape trade selection process. So these are already pre-selected to be low yielders. They'd be better off driving around somewhere and finding a natural grove of it. Usually around January or February, you'll see all the brown pods hanging from the trees like ribbons. That's when they start falling from the trees. That's the time to go ahead and harvest them. And that's when the sugars in here will be all dry and crystalline and crunchy.
All right. That is the end of that one, everybody. You got several questions. Comments
two comments quick. Two comments quick while I was there. Is one, is that farm, your farm, has a ton of alpacas on it. Alpacas are Western Hemisphere camelids. They would have been adapted to eating some sort of locust pod at some point in time in their life. And then the other one is the honey locust variety that was being researched in the 20s and 30s was the Millidor. I said on this, it's actually the Millwood variety. I was actually pretty amazed, Wayne, that sometimes these videos that are somewhat impromptu, like I'll be walking along and Wayne's seen me do this before, and I go like, oh look, wait, and then I just start blabbing away. He goes, wait till I get the phone going. I'm amazed at how well done some of them come out. That's really cool. So the honey locust, it's a dramatically underutilized plant. The locust that I was referring to being an industrial product is actually the carob. You know, that's there's machinery adapted to the carob that only need a slight little tweak to make that equipment work for honey locusts. I have fed it to pigs, but one of the things I didn't like about feeding it to pigs is they don't grind it all up before, you know, because their teeth, they eat too fast, and the seeds will bypass and they sprout. If that's what you want, it's a great way to get them sprouted. It's to run them through an animal. That's what they're designed for. They love them for the sugar, for sure. Cattle like them. One of the things about the honey locusts, I think I mentioned it last week, if you plant a nursery bed of them sometimes that seed will sprout year after year after year after year. Tom, who's my nursery guy, the on-the-ground nursery manager, he uses, I believe it's sulfuric acid. It's like really nasty sulfuric acid. And so he throws the seed into the acid, and then he drains the acid off, and then he rinses it with water, and that's enough to etch the coat, and it'll all sprout that year. Or if you're going to do it on your own, take a coping saw blade or a jigsaw blade, and just drag it across the seed coat until you see white, and just cut through, and just kind of do that. You can't do that with millions. And absolutely, honey locusts have tons of thorns. Not always. So what they do is they go through their juvenile phase. We talked about this yesterday, last week, is that these plants go through a life cycle, and when the honey locusts are juvenile, they've got thorns all over them massively. Well, then if they're browsed, they produce more thorns. So if a deer comes along and nibbles on it, then once it gets above a certain height, gets a certain time or a certain size, I don't exactly know what triggers it, the tops will be thornless. So what some people have done is you grab the mature material up at the top of the tree, it has no thorns, and you graft it onto a seedling, and that top that's already gone hormonally mature stays thornless. That's nuisance, but if you got a particularly good tree that has lots of pods on it, you can use that. One of the things with the sugar in it, before we get to that, you should bash it up if you want to feed it to animals. What I used to do when I still was living with my parents is there was a shopping center down the road that had a couple of honey locusts on little islands up in the parking lot, and I'd gather up all the pods, put them in a pile, and I'd start the lawnmower up, and I'd tilt it back, and so the lawnmower deck is up this way, and I'd push it forward and have it revved up full blast and drop it down on the pile and lift it up and drop it down on the pile and lift it up until I got it all kind of like beat up and smashed, and then I'd feed it to the pigs or to the goats or whatever. So if you're going to do it for sugar at home, have some way to smash it up, your lawnmower. Then you put it in a bit like a 55-gallon barrel or something, a trash can. Fill that barrel up full of water, let it soak for 24 hours. Well, what happens is through simple diffusion, the sugars in the locust pods will go into the water, and so you'll have half the amount of sugar in the pod and half the amount of sugar in the water. Well, now you can take that water away, you can ferment it to make hooch. I know Dustin is totally on the hooch. Or you can then evaporate that off and have the sugars left behind in various different other ways to refine it. I'd just put it through an old Corona flour mill and grind it up and use that in pancake batter. You know, we're not accustomed to honey locust as a flavor in our diet, but it's perfectly, good food, lots of sugar, lots of protein. Yippee.
Look what Alyssa's put in there. Alyssa's been thinking.
Go ahead.
Oh, just look what Alyssa's put in there, Mark, about some other varieties.
What's interesting about the landscape trade is because people don't like the sweet fruit and pods up off their lawns and off the driveways and stuff. There's been like 20, 30, 40 years almost of breeding for all male varieties for fruitless. Like take the Bradford pear. They make little pears about the size of your pinky fingernail. They're insane all across the east up through the Midwest. Considered an invasive species in places. So with a lot of cities, you can actually tell what the landscape trade has been planting by the allergies that people have in spring. It's like, how do you do that? Well, if these plants are all male and they don't produce pods, they produce pollen. So you've got, the honey locust cities and you've got the pear cities and this kind of stuff. And you can actually do a map of the allergies. And the allergies map tells you what the landscape trade has been planting. So Millwood, for example, and Hershey and Calhoun were all developed to have sweeter, larger pods. I would like Alyssa, because she's already paid attention to that, what we need, and this is something for the whole entire group, any useful plant that we got out there, perennial plant, tree species, we need, us as individuals, citizen scientists, activists, revolutionaries, We have to go out and find the most productive ones, the most pest and disease resistant, the ones that are more drought tolerant, cold tolerant, heat tolerant, these extremes, because I don't care if you believe whether humans have actually been contributing to the changing levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or not, but we have statistical evidence that the weather patterns are indeed more erratic in the past 30 years than they have been over the past 100 years. Is that not enough data to find out? It doesn't matter. I got to survive on the land. I got to produce something to feed my animals, to feed my family, to pay the bills. A farmer has to work with reality. We need all of us to go out and find all of these species, get them together, do the breeding work, and then send them back out to the various different regions. So we're the perfect network to do that. So, Alyssa, find me examples of Hershey, Millwood, Ashworth, Calhoun, etc. Because we need those species. We need to variety trial them in all the regions of the country.
Mark, you see Lisa's question?
I do. Epophis is okay. I've seen times when it, and I'm just trying to think right now of the various different times I've seen it. When it's larger, I think, and this is unscientifically proven. It's just from my experience. When they're larger, you cut them down, they're dead. But if they're smaller, like less than 6 or 8 inches, you cut them and they're back just as well as ever. And you can use it as part of a living fence. That was part of where a lot of it was used in the the Depression era during the whole prairie states shelter belt movement. Is that it was used as living fence. Very drought tolerant, wind resistant. It's a little bit slow growing, but it is an amazing tree. And it's native to North America, unlike multiflora rose and some other things that we could use. Autumn olive, Russian olive.
Yeah, which was right behind you, by the way, on that picture. That other tree, that was a Russian olive. By the way, that film was late in September. That's why you were seeing fall. We had probably had a frost by then when that was done. So let's go to the next video. Guys, be thinking of questions. Robert's already put something on here. We'll get to that afterwards, Robert. Let's do this one. If I find my cursor. Where it is, there it is.
Yeah, I'll just comment on Robert. Oh, go ahead.
Natural restoration agriculture in motion on the rocks itself. No soil whatsoever. Lichens float around in the atmosphere and they land, and for whatever reason they start growing. A lichen is a symbiotic relationship between an algae and a fungus. And the algae is the green. It photosynthesizes and produces some sugars that will feed the fungus, and the fungus exudes certain chemicals that will dissolve the solid rock. So they take the solid rock with sunlight, air, and water, and they bring the minerals from the rock into their own bodies. Then the lichens will eventually crumble and die, and as they do, they'll decompose. And they topsoil. And so what happens then, there's enough dead lichen bodies after a while. It holds a little bit more water. It's a little bit of a biological sponge. If you notice here in this little spot, there was enough of a depression to collect a little bit more organic matter. Pretty soon there was enough decomposed lichen and perhaps pine needles and pine pollen catkins that the mosses could begin to grow. And as time goes on, pretty soon you can get some grasses established. Eventually you can get your woody plants established, and prickly pear cactus established under here as well. What I find particularly noticeable are, one, nobody tilled this soil, nobody made compost, nobody irrigated it, nobody had pumps, bells, and whistles or anything, and nature itself has created soil. And so when we use this is brilliant technology. This is how the planet has become covered with green living things. This is how you make topsoil. So if we now go out to our landscape, we figure out a way to obstruct the movement of organic matter, perhaps lay a branch across the slope, needles will accumulate, they'll start to decompose, starts to turn into soil, have some channels in the ground, to our particular collection spot. That's where we can put a valuable species that will produce some sort of crop. Either our nopales growing on our prickly pear cactus or pinon pine grasses to be grazed by livestock. And let's see if we got any kind of soil going on here. I bet you'll have some. Look at that. Dirt. Where did the dirt come from? This biological system made the soil. That's our whole entire point with the restoration agriculture systems. We can start with a bare rock and we can farm it.
I'm glad you put that up, Wayne. I know I've showed photos, like from Boundary Waters or Isle Royale National Park, more humid areas. There's no doubt about it. That rock with a little prickly pear cactus and a little pine tree growing out of it is an arid environment. We just had a conversation today with the farmer-type people, the land manager guys, and then the ecologists at this nonprofit, and all the soil people, but you got to do this and you got to do that and you got to develop that soil and build that soil. I'm like, back off for a second here. Natural processes, all by itself, make the soil. Oh, no, you got to add compost and the bells and the whistles and the stir it and the sprays. And it's like, time out. How did the soil get here in the first place? And then the ecologists finally are like, yeah, that's right. This is how soil is made. I mean, look at that picture. This is high, mountain, desert, dry. How much rain do you get, Wayne? 12, 14 inches a year?
12 to 14. Yep, 12 to
14
14
inches. I mean, that is dry as a bone. And it gets, bone cold in the wintertime and hotter in Hades in the summertime. And yet you've got rock turning into soil because that's how nature does it. So when we imitate that process with our agriculture, we will create the soil. Now we can go ahead and we can do all the bells and whistles if we want to, but if we know that if we imitate the natural plant community that will survive there, we know that if we manage the water a little bit, the plant community will create the soil for us. And you don't have to believe me, okay? You just don't have to believe me. It does. It just does. Now, I wanted to make a comment about Robert's question about the variety of black locust called chipmast, making just one trunk and all that kind of stuff. I'm not intending to, put anybody down or slap anybody back when we offer really cool stuff. But what I really do want to put forward on this within this particular community, we're all about reality-based stuff. We're the Economics action team. What we are not is the Economics find something cool and reblog about it and repost it, talk about it. So what I want to do, I wanted to go back to who was mentioning Alyssa, the Millwood, Ashwood, Hershey, and Calhoun. We want examples of that in our hands, in the ground, period. If you want to talk about it only, that's great, that's cool. You know about it, find it. Find those things. Okay, shipmast locust. Let's go find those and let's spread them out amongst us and let's start variety trialing them everywhere. Talk time is over. Research time is over. The kind of research we need is action. So we're the Economic action team. So we would like you to go out and find some shade master for us, and we'll get going on it. And that's intended to be encouragement because the time for inaction is over. And yeah, I'm not going to just spend every Wednesday night here wasting my breath on a bunch of people that want to talk about cool stuff. We got to put roots in the ground. We're changing the face of agriculture and the planet.
Yeah, they are. Great, Mark. Mary, did you see? I think you're referring to Alyssa's comment there. I don't know if she had a question. I wasn't finding it. So, Alyssa, if you remember what maybe Mary's alluding to about a question, and I'm not sure that you asked one, and if so, I'm just missing it. So anyway, you guys can put that one back in. But then Mary,
Osage orange.
Go ahead.
Osage orange was used a lot for bow making. It's also great for shredding your clothes if you ever try to walk near it. And the fruit can be used for making preserves. I don't like it. It's gross. But it's also very drought tolerant.
Mark B, you were saying something. Mark B, you were saying something.
Yeah, the audio seemed to have a lot of feedback, echoing.
Wow. Okay. Don't know what it was. Maybe it'll go away.
All right. So here's one of those things. Why am I getting double feedback? I don't know. Wait, hang on a second. To Mary's question, this was the webinar that was scheduled for tonight that I didn't finish putting together. Was the structure of woody plants. What's interesting, you read over and over and over again about how this tree is tap-rooted, this is fibrous roots, this is heart-shaped roots, fan-shaped roots, period. That is 100%. Okay, it's not total bullshit. If you put it in a nice sandy loam, well watered, it will form that particular shape. If you take a shagbark tree that classically wants to make a gigantic taproot straight down, if you put it on fractured rock, it's going to go every which way. So the root, although it may have a tendency that it wants to be a taproot, what it finds under the ground determines what it actually does. One of the most extreme examples that I personally have seen, there was a white birch, and white birch classically has a very shallow root system, half a meter at the most, very fibrous, lots of surface. There was a new section of highway that they blasted through the cliffs, and there's a white birch tree up at the top of the cliff, and it had this single taproot, the size of my leg at first, eventually down to 2 inches diameter, and it kept going down. It was 175 feet, still going down. Single taproot, no side roots or anything. And this is a shallow, fibrous surface root plant. So part of what we're talking about with this whole ecology webinar series is that the plant has certain predispositions that are then affected by the environment. The plant also affects the environment. So there's this double feedback going back and forth between them. So does Osage orange have a taproot? If it does have a taproot, if you put it on a soil that will prevent a taproot from forming, it won't. So could you use it to stabilize a steeper slope? Probably you could use trees to stabilize a steeper slope, period, especially if you combine it with grasses. Oh, my audio is...
Yeah, it is. I mute myself, but you see the questions up there and other comments. Did you see Sam's question earlier and his comment? I'll put that back down. And then I'm going to mute.
Yeah, our job is to find out, first of all, what is nature doing on our property? Right here where I am today in the Washington, D.C. area, the resistance that I'm getting from people, you can't do that. It's like, I'm not saying that you can. I'm saying, look over here. Look over here. We have an oak tree over a cherry tree, over a hawthorn, next to a walnut with blackberries and raspberries and grapes, and there's grass growing all around. Imitate that, and it's effortless. Oh, no, but then you have to do this and this. It's like, nobody did anything to get this plant community established on this particular farm. They look at it, and then I say, yeah, let's do that over here, and it will work equally as well. Then all of a sudden it's like, oof, but now we've got an orchard. We have to spray, and we have to mow. We have to do this, and we have to do that. It's like, no, it's effortless. So our job is to find out how to set things up so that it will be effortless and go in the direction that nature wants. And our job is to manage it by harvesting yields. and it's like herding chickens. It's a dynamic process. It's going to change through time. I've got a series of videos that I'm working on right now. It'll take me a while to finish it. Working on a particular site on New Forest Farm that was I originally it was a direct seeded walnut planting, and then a few years later we planted white oak, we planted American chestnut, and a couple of hickories out there, and then turn it loose, walk away from it, and it's going to take care of itself. Well, I've been keeping an eye on it and watching what stage it's developing through, and I knew that I had to get on top of it if I wanted to prevent these other species from detrimentally affecting the species that I planted. And so I just started going in there and disturbing the site right now, disturbing it by removing firewood and mushroom logs, etc. And what I found out is I'm about 3 years, I think is what it is. If I had done this 3 years ago, all of the walnuts that are left behind would just be straight as an arrow and cranking like you wouldn't believe. But what's happened is, beginning about 3 years ago, these other species started to overtop the walnuts and slow them down. The walnuts went looking for the light, so they're crooked. So I have fewer walnuts than I wanted, and they're not in as good a form as I wanted. So 3 years, I just learned a lesson that I can only learn once in a lifetime. It's like, oops, should have done it then. Our job is to figure that out. We're going to get this feedback. It's not screwing it up what I did, because I've been getting beef off that particular area every year for 20 years. I got hay off of it for like 3 or 4 years, and then I've been getting beef ever since. And now I'm getting firewood from it. I'm going to be getting mushrooms. I've already gotten building material from the hybrid poplars. I'm going to be getting more oyster mushroom logs from the hybrid poplars. So 6 different yields, and it's been throughout the years. And I haven't done anything but like turn the cows in there and plant more trees. Now I'm cutting. Now this is actually like a lot of work. So yes, our job is to find out how to get the conditions for nature to go and do its thing in its particular direction that will give you a yield and you can harvest while sustaining and perpetuating the whole system. Absolutely. Sam gets a gold star right in the middle of the forehead. Boink.
All right, I turn mine back on a second. I'm going to play this next video. It's fairly short, and maybe we'll get this one and one more done. We'll see.
You know, this is just a little pocket that happened naturally here on the hillside. We've got 2 trees next to each other, and somehow this stone, ended up being placed between them. Instead of just cutting the ladder fuels and laying a brush across the slope, we can take stone and lay it across the slope. So much of Europe, all the way through the Middle East, up through Greece and Italy, I've seen this over and over and over again, into Spain, have these little stone terraces, and that accumulates organic matter up behind it. So all these pine needles, pine cones, other leaves that blow in, the other plants that happen to grow in there, we're accumulating a little bit of organic matter. We're actually making soil in that little pocket right there. It may not look like much here, and because it's so arid in this area, it's going to be slower than if we did that someplace in a more humid environment. This is how we make soil, right on the spot. No compost piles necessary, no hauling or moving stuff, other than the fact that at first we put a little barrier of rocks up just to catch the organic matter. Rabbit poop will tumble into there, deer will bed down and poop and pee in there. This is a little fertility hotspot. Just a natural example of soil building. So this is like that same tree, now its roots have been in that crack. And just that mechanical barrier catching needles on the uphill side of it to make a little bit of soil on the top. That's an incredible tree.
Okay, I'm going to mute.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed in there, the terminology I used, I don't know if I've used it before, called ladder fuels, especially if in more drier areas or if we're using species that are fire-adapted species. Their job is to burn. They're just going to do that every once in a while. So when we have trees, as soon as we can, start removing the branches down low. Clip them off. Go look at a pruning book, how to clip it just on the outside of the collar. and lay the branches across the slope so that any needles and leaves will accumulate on that. So it's like on that rock, you can't dig a swale or a terrace in the rock, but you can build on top of it using the brush that you've clipped in order to catch organic matter, and that will start the process. Another thing that I wanted to do is to, once again, if we're on the action side of things, we want to actually do things. So yeah, we want to find out these really cool names, and immediately, as soon as we find out these cool names, we start looking for where do we find these particular species. And then another thing I just want us to all be aware of is we don't have to have land in order to do this. We have a network now that we can share with and can communicate with and collaborate with. So even if you personally don't have land that you're residing on in order to do this, breeding work, etc., that doesn't matter. We're still out there collecting seed, looking for the earliest to reproduce, the heaviest producers, pest and disease resistant, sheer total of neglect, all that kind of stuff, beautiful timber form, all the different qualities that we find value in, and then we share with others. And even if you're totally urban, I was talking with some kids today that were catching, they had a little net and they're catching aquatic critters in this little swampy area. And I was mentioning with them is all you need is that crack between the parking lot and the curb. That's enough to get a tree established. And you can have a honey locust tree, an apple tree, or this tree, or that tree. It doesn't matter. You don't have to own land. You wouldn't believe the vacant lots across this country that I have planted with edible food perennials. I don't own the land. I'm not going to harvest the food. That's not the point. The point is we do this all the time. It's who we are. It's what we do. And so I'm not addressing the questions in that webinar, that particular video at all, other than the trimming your ladder fuels, because we want to prevent like a gentle ground fire. If the gentle ground fire goes along and catches some branches, it can burn right up, crawls up the tree. That's why they call them ladder fuels. Then you lay those across the slope so they can catch organic matter in compost.
Did you see Mary's question here, Mark? Very end, last one.
Eaten by the deer. Now we have situations. Right where we are, right here, where I'm in Washington, D.C., surrounded by, Boss Watch, the biggest urban area in North America. This is where the deer come from, and this is where the deer go to. Certain places like this one right here, there's no way they're going to be able to get non-palatable species to thrive here unless they protect them when they're young. And the 5-foot-tall tree tubes, if you go to Southwest Badger, SW Badger, RCand.com, I think I've mentioned them before. I'm on that nonprofit board. They do a lot of conservation and habitat restoration work. They actually get tree tubes from the Plantra company, Plantra, and they sell them online for the same price that Plantra sells them for. So if you get them from Southwest Badger, they use the profits from the sale to do conservation work. You're just gonna have to do that. You can use fence. Remember, all fences leak. I don't know how bad the elk problem is in your situation. It's pretty expensive proposition to make an exclosure to exclude the elk. One of the things that you can do is try to find a general travel corridors, and you may want to have a restricted area where you only fence a travel corridor, so they go through the travel corridor. Instead of fencing out your place so they stay away from your plants, fence a travel corridor so as they're moving along, they bounce off the edges and they stay in the travel corridor. Usually those are along streams and creeks and that sort of thing. Or you can do what I'm recommending here, is there are species that the deer don't like, and in this area here it's pawpaw. And so why would you grow anything that deer love to eat, like chestnuts, for example, when you could grow pawpaw, which the deer hate? Yeah, but I want to grow chestnuts. Well, great, grow chestnuts. Use the tree tubes, the tree fence, exclosure fence. One of the things that I use a lot in the earlier years was a dozen eggs. You just take the dozen eggs, you throw them in the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket, mash them up, and then stir it with water. They don't have to be rotten or anything. and splash that on the trees, and that works pretty good as a repellent. Nothing works perfectly against them. The 5-foot tree shelters are the ones, that's the way to go. Or you get them in, here we go. Keegan's got this great point. Plant them in a thicket.
Yeah.
Honey locust, blackberries, raspberries, multiflora rose. Exactly right. That's exactly what. And if you think about a grassland, and then you think about the first species that start to invade this open grassland, they're usually the thorny things. And maybe the thorns are only in the juvenile phase. Well, here you move out in the grassland. Well, who lives in the grassland? The grazing animals. They graze, graze, graze. So if all of a sudden I'm a young tree here, I need some sort of protection. So you have all these little thorny, nasty things around there that are protecting that little seedling that's a tender seedling right in the center. You know that you planted a chestnut tree or an apple tree or whatever it is there, and you just make sure that the other things don't interfere with your apple tree, and the other things protect your apple from the deer or the elk. I do that a lot. What I use as the management tool, showed it a couple of sessions ago, is I got a heavy-duty two-handled weed eater, and I use a table saw blade. And so I'll let the thicket grow crazy with multiflora rose, but I've got my other things in there as well. And every once in a while when I go by, I'll just, zing, 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 take out the multiflora rose and let the other stuff catch up. And eventually the multiflora rose gets minimized as the other species in that thicket start to dominate it. And the
Let's
tree
do this
tubes
last.
will work.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, tree tubes will work. Tree tubes will work for the Korean pines. You probably only need a 2-foot tube for the pine in the early years because they're pretty small. They're only about 6 inches when they show up, and they'll take 2 or 3 years to settle in because they're just trying to get their roots established. Once they've settled in, 2, 3, 4 years or whatever, then they'll grow just as fast as an eastern white pine. Good idea, Alyssa, with the gooseberries.
I think this last video will be great because it's marked benefits of perennials. I remember this one. We'll finish with this one and then let you guys ask questions. John just made a comment in here. We'll get that one when we get back. Let's do this last video.
Things I wanted to talk about here is some of the benefits of perennials in the landscape. The longest-lived perennials that we know about are trees. Trees are incredibly useful in the agricultural landscape. Many people don't think that because all they've ever seen is plowed fields and wheat and corn and all that kind of stuff. But we can very successfully integrate trees into any kind of agricultural system that we have, and they have several different benefits. One being longevity, of course. Two is more drought resistance because they can send roots deeper and deeper than any grasses can. I think it's a mesquite that has the record of like 400 some odd feet deep. There's no prairie grass in the world. I'm sorry, people who are prairie grass enthusiasts. There's no prairie grass in the world that will go down 400 feet for water. Another benefit of having woody plants, trees in your system. So we look over here to this grove of trees. Notice in the shade how green the grass is. We've now protected that grass from the evapotranspiration, all the heat from the sun. If you go under there, it's cooler for us. We like to sit in the shade. That's because the sun's photons aren't striking the surface of the earth and converting it to heat. They're converting it to green into photosynthesis. We now have photosynthesis from 50 or 60 feet up in the air all the way down to the ground level. Now look on the sunny side of those trees and look how burned out the grass is. It's so hot that the grass burns out. So a little bit of shade is enough to get a boost in any kind of grass or forage production underneath the trees. That said, the tree roots actually are a competitive factor in any kind of production near them. So in a agricultural setting, from the time we first plant the trees really young, every year we'll want to root prune those trees using a subsoiler hook, or if you're doing it on a landscape skid, a long-bladed shovel, just to make sure that you're clipping those roots in right next to your crop so the tree roots don't go out and take nutrients and moisture from your crop. They're going straight down and staying within the row of the trees. So we get the benefits of shade, which increases our forage production underneath. And if we design the system properly, instead of just having raggedly invasive Chinese elm and Russian olive, we can have cropping trees, whatever the crop trees that are more suited to this particular area. And I've already seen in the area, I've seen black walnut. We could get pecan growing here, hazelnut if we get enough moisture, chestnut once again with enough moisture. Many of the different tree crops that are grown, nationwide and have huge markets for, we can grow right here. Not on 10 inches of rain. We have to manage the water that strikes here and also grab any water that's coming to the site from somewhere else. One of the things I wanted to mention with site layout, if we're going to be laying out a water management system here, a question commonly asked, a lot of people say, well, show me where the ponds go. It's like, well, we don't know where the ponds go yet. We need to first go up to our point source here, and using our equipment, run that master line. This is the line that's going to unify the water management over the whole entire property. That line will now become the master pattern line and tells us how to pattern everything else.
And that was the end of that one. Good place to just let Mark comment. John had a question, and I'm going to throw it in.
Yeah, just look at that. Look at that. Thank you, Wayne. The photo with the brown grass on the sunny side, the green grass on the shady side, and the not as green as the vigorous green in the shade. I mean, that alone is worth going back and just looking at that and say, this is real. We shade that grass a little bit. We cool it. It doesn't lose as much water. We have more feed for our animals. That means they get to eat more. They get to poop more. They get to fertilize the grass. They fertilize the trees more. That's a beneficial relationship just by us placing the right thing in the right place in the environment. Jean-Paul had this question here that I guess my short answer is, well, I'm not exactly sure. That's going to end up being a custom relationship between yourself and a landowner. You might want to investigate the timber rights language because timber rights, like mineral rights, subsurface rights, it's a fairly well-known, body of law and contract relationships that would have the same kind of language that you can go in there and say, well, yeah, I'm going to, live on your property for very cheap or free. I'm going to improve the value of the property by, planting these trees, doing these water management structures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I own the genetics of these plants because I've done the breeding work. That's one way to do it. Also, I do research with universities. I've got a couple of different, like proprietary genetic agreements with different universities. So that would be one way to have that included. Because you think about it, you spend a lifetime breeding these trees. My hazelnuts and chestnuts and Korean pines, there's nobody else who's got trees like me, period. Well, that doesn't mean they're going to work for everybody. It's just that nobody else has spent the past 20 years of their life doing the breeding work, the selection work, and the care of these trees. That is a valuable resource. And if you look at all these different nursery catalogs where there are these, patented varieties of trees, that is legitimate research that has an economic value that belongs to you. And so that should be protected somehow contractually. And I think one of the ways to look at would be like some of these breeding agreements with universities, and then also the timber rights side of things. Then another thing, the other week, Jean-Paul, your question kind of surprised me. Like, what other site do I think is really great and worth looking at and all that kind of stuff? And I was a little bit stumped at the time as I thought, because there's like so many that we got going on right now. Then I then thought of one that is stellar, is top-notch, over the top. They're doing it really, really well, and they have a very public face, and that's The Good Life Farm in Ithaca, New York. Garrett and Melissa are the proprietors of The Good Life Farm. They spent a season at New Forest Farm, learning, with side by side with us. And what I thought was amazing about Garrett and Melissa, she's funny. She's a little bit quiet, and she's like the skeptic, the real silent skeptic, and she's got to, cross her arms and make sure it's working. Whereas Garrett's like, I'm on it. And he goes and he does it. He's probably one of the most generally competent human beings I've ever met. You know, he kind of sits around one afternoon, gee, I think I'll build a, and then 20 minutes later, it's done. You know, to like standards that I never could possibly imagine, just so incredibly good at it. So the Good Life Farm, they designed it to manage the water. They're doing alley cropping with cider apples and pears. They've got tons of asparagus in there. Then they've got movable hoop houses where they're doing turmeric and ginger. They have probably on a small scale, I think they have less than 30 acres. They were doing the mob stock grazing, multi-species grazing better than anybody ever seen it. They went out, the last time I was there was a couple of years ago, they had cattle, pigs, sheep, and then turkeys and ducks and chickens. And by the time all these critters moved through the system, and that ground was packed this thick with mulch and poop, and you want to see plants respond, you give them that much fertilizer. Oh my goodness. Well, I was there as they were building their hard apple cidery. One of the advantages of where they're located in New York is New York, the state government realizes that, hey, wow, you know, this wine stuff and this microbrew stuff and this cider stuff actually means economic development, which means tax revenue for the government, instead of like in the state of Wisconsin where they're saying, hey, wait a minute, they're competing with Miller Coors and Leinenkugels. We got to stop that stuff. There's a radically different regulatory framework in New York State. It's one of the most favorable places to start a winery or some kind of alcohol fermentation operation. So instead of just setting up a nice, cute little cider operation, you know, they've hung out with me. They've seen the whole Organic Valley thing. They were members of Organic Valley for a season. They started a cider network. So if you go to their cidery, they've got their cider that they're retailing in the tasting room, and they've got cider from your place and your place and your place and your place. They've got 30, 40, 50 different ciders represented at their retail store. So all of a sudden their store is better because they're helping their neighbors' operations to be better. And so they've got this networked cider tasting operation within this beautiful alley crop situation that's mostly perennial. And the animals are moving through the system. So I'd say far and away that's the most public, most beautiful system that you could see. And if you cut the thorns off a honey locust, do they grow back? Not that I'm aware of. I don't think so. I believe that honey locust thorns are a modified stem structure. There are some plants like a rose. If you take the thorn, you kind of twist it off, it just comes right off. That's a modified leaf structure. It has all the abscission and the bud scars and all that kind of stuff. And so the thorn is basically a leaf. Well, on the honey locust, it's actually a modified stem structure, but it has no terminal buds and no dormant buds. So I don't think it grows back. Give it a try. How many inches of precipitation for chestnuts? You technically, theoretically, should have 30 inches or more. Do hazels need as much water as chestnuts? Do they need as much water? No. I've seen these guys surviving. I've seen them in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, follow Boulder Creek all the way up. Tons of hazelnuts growing on the banks. They don't get a lot of water. Do they produce as much? Probably not, because water will be a limiting factor when it comes to yields. Because you think about making something that's high protein and fat, it takes a lot of resources to do that. I've seen hazelnuts growing in sand dunes in Michigan. Can I read the question before answering it? No. Oh wait, I just did. So yeah, Lisa was mentioning about Garrett and Melissa's place 20 miles north of Ithaca using draft horses. That was another thing. Garrett's like, yeah, I think I want to learn how to use draft horses. So he starts visiting Amish and learns how to use draft horses. Like, oh. And Lisa has a cidery. All right, Lisa, do you participate with Garrett and Melissa? So in Princeton on Friday, are the pine nuts on the menu coming for me? I don't think so. Most of mine are going for making new trees. And is Sodexo going to be working with Organic Valley? I have no idea. How do you find the right number of trees per acre or spacing for silver pasture in climate zone 7? A couple webinars back, I had an average number of trees per acre. It was a chart that said average number of trees per acre. If you have more than that, they'll start to have competitive effects amongst one another. When you plant them at a certain, you want to get as high a density as you can, so that their competitive effects, their limiting factors are the environment acting on them, not one another acting on each other. And that chart had a table of relative densities based on stem size, and all of that is modified by rainfall amounts. So the drier the area you are, the less dense you want them to be. So let's see. So the workshop that Wayne and I are doing soon at that college. What college are we doing a workshop at? Wayne, you're on. No audio, bud. Turn it on. Unmute. There you go.
So Mark must be. I think Mark B is doing that for me to keep it so I'm not feedbacking. But Mary, we are going to be videoing,
right on, Mark.
And we'll see what we get. That's the one I talked earlier. You might not have come on yet. There's a videographer, a filmmaker actually, who's making a documentary of water issues in California. She's going to be there with us, and we are going to video all of the workshop that Mark and Spencer Smith do. We'll see what happens with the video. Well, let's just see what the quality is first, and then what we're going to do with it. Hopefully, we'll have something that we can use.
And actually, here's a biological issue. Is I just came from the client's house. I got here like 5 minutes before the webinar went live, and we just had dinner. Had about 45 gallons of water because we were out in the field all day, and I've got a ferocious bladder issue, and I would really appreciate going to the bathroom soon.
I think we could call it here, everybody, because Mark's with us every week. You guys can ask some more of your questions. And, guy, great session, all of you. Great questions. It looks like Lisa said a little bit more there, Mark. She lives in Eco Village. And thank you, guys. We aren't even asking for it, and you're putting in your thank yous for Mark. Yeah. Nick, as always. So we've got tomorrow, let's see, what do we have tomorrow? Oh, we've got Controlled Environment Agriculture tomorrow night, and then we have Friday. Remember, that's when the SDMC will be, not Thursday, and we're not doing Vails. That was a mistake. You should actually get an email about that. Probably you're getting it while this is going on. Vail is going to be coming back, so that's what I want to end this with. And this is promoting. It's what Vail's doing. She starts tomorrow, actually, with her live course. And I sent something out to you guys on it. I'm not going to send anything else about that. But that starts tomorrow. If you guys are interested in that at all, that's with Vail. And Vail is going to start to become a series teacher for us after she gets her course going several weeks. She had all kinds of really positive things to say about you guys after the webinar, and her slides are up now, I believe. Yes, I'm sure we put them up on where hers was put up. Thanks, everybody, and let's let Mark go use the restroom, and we'll say
And next week is structure and function of woody plants. See you then.